I cooked, I cleaned, I begged. The smell of food clung to my hair. My hands raw from scrubbing floors until they burned. I set the table perfectly, every plate aligned, every glass shining, hoping, just once, they might see me, acknowledge me, treat me like part of the family. But when my in-laws sat down, their laughter filled the room, not because of joy, but because of me. My mother-in-law poked at the food, wrinkling her nose. Too salty, she sneered, pushing the plate aside. My father-in-law smirked. Does she even know how to cook? Or is she just playing house? Their voices cut through me sharper than knives. I looked at my husband, desperate for a word, a glance, a sign that he was on my side. But he stayed silent. His eyes stayed fixed on his plate, his hands steady, as if he hadn't heard a thing. My heart sank lower than the floor. I forced a smile, whispering, "I'll do better next time," even though my chest felt hollow. My mother-in-law's laugh was sharp. Better? Don't waste your breath. You'll never fit here. The others joined in, their voices echoing off the walls, their faces lit with cruel amusement. And there I was, standing at the edge of the table, invisible except for the moments they chose to mock me. I begged them in my silence, begged him with my eyes, but nothing came. Only laughter. Only silence. Only the reminder that in this house I was unwanted. The next morning I woke up before everyone else. My eyes stung from crying through the night, but I dragged myself into the kitchen anyway. I chopped vegetables, kneaded dough, boiled tea, and laid out breakfast as if their words hadn't cut me to pieces. Maybe today, I told myself, maybe today they'll notice my effort. Maybe today they'll see me as family. But when they walked in, it was the same scene all over again. My mother-in-law sniffed the air and smirked. "She's trying again," she muttered, loud enough for me to hear. My father-in-law picked up a piece of bread, tore it apart, and dropped it back on the plate. Too dry. Waste of food. My brother-in-law laughed, shaking his head. Doesn't she get tired of failing? Their laughter filled the kitchen, stabbing at my chest. I looked at my husband, hoping he'd say something, anything. He sat down quietly, sipped his tea, and kept his eyes low. Not a word. Not even a glance toward me. My stomach turned. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to ask why he let them rip me apart every day. But I stayed silent because that's what I had learned to do. I washed their dishes after, my hands raw under the hot water. The sink filled with foam, but my mind was racing. Was this my life now? Cooking, cleaning, begging for approval that would never come? Every time I bent lower, they pushed me deeper into the floor. Every time I gave more, they laughed louder. And the one person who should have defended me, the man who promised to stand by me, remained quiet, hiding behind their cruelty. The days blurred together. I swept the floors until they gleamed, only to hear my mother-in-law mutter, "Still dusty." I ironed their clothes, folding them neatly, only for my father-in-law to throw his shirt on the chair and sneer. She missed a crease. I brought them tea, my hand steady despite my shaking heart, and my brother-in-law chuckled. She's trying so hard to be useful. How pathetic. Each word chipped at me until I hardly recognized myself. I avoided mirrors because I didn't want to see the tired eyes, the forced smile, the woman shrinking smaller every day. I had come into this house as a wife, hopeful, carrying dreams of building a life with my husband. Instead, I had become their servant, their joke, their target. One evening, as I served dinner, my mother-in-law looked me up and down with a smirk. "Why do you even try? You'll never be enough for this family. You don't belong here, and you never will." Her words hit like a hammer. My knees nearly gave out, but I held myself up, staring at the floor so they wouldn't see the tears filling my eyes. I glanced at my husband, begging him silently to defend me. His jaw clenched, but his lips stayed sealed. He kept chewing, kept pretending nothing was wrong. That silence screamed louder than all their insults combined. And it was in that silence that something inside me began to shift. I realized they didn't just hate me, they thrived on it. My humiliation was their entertainment. My pain was their comfort. And his silence was their permission. That night, when I lay in bed beside him, I didn't cry. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of their voices still pressing down on me. But under that weight, a new thought was rising, sharp and unshakable. They believed I was weak because I begged. They believed I would never fight back. But they didn't know me, not yet. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It built slowly like water filling a glass, drop after drop until it spilled over. One evening I spent the entire day preparing a meal they had demanded. Every dish exactly how they liked it. Every spice measured with trembling hands. I even burned my arm on the stove trying to rush, the skin red and stinging, but I kept working. I thought, if they see my effort, if they taste my care, maybe just once they'll soften. When I placed the dishes on the table, my heart pounded with hope. My mother-in-law took a bite, paused, and let out a cold laugh. Overcooked. Again. My father-in-law pushed his plate away without tasting it. She'll never learn. My brother-in-law smirked, tossing his spoon onto the table. Maybe she should stop trying. She's not wife material, she's a mistake. Their words rang in my head like thunder. But it was my husband's silence that shattered me. He sat there, chewing slowly, eyes on his plate, as if he hadn't heard a thing. No defense. No comfort. Nothing. My chest ached as if a knife had slipped between my ribs. I excused myself quietly, carrying the heavy pot back into the kitchen. The moment I stepped away, their laughter grew louder. It followed me, echoing in the tiled room as if the walls themselves mocked me. I gripped the counter, my burned arm throbbing, tears slipping down my cheeks. For the first time I whispered, "I hate them." The words felt strange, dangerous, but real. The cruelty didn't stop there. The next morning I overheard my sister-in-law on the phone. She giggled, saying, "She tries so hard to be part of us, but everyone knows she doesn't belong. Even her husband doesn't care." My stomach twisted. That was when I realized they weren't just mocking me behind my back. They were proud of it. They wore my suffering like a badge, passing it around like a story for their amusement. I began to notice the pattern. They wanted me to beg. Every insult was sharper when I pleaded for their approval. Every silence from my husband was heavier when I turned to him for help. My humiliation fed them. And for so long I had given them exactly what they wanted. One night, after another dinner of insults, I walked into our bedroom and looked at my husband sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. I asked softly, "Why don't you ever speak up?" He didn't look at me. "It's easier this way. Don't take it so seriously." His words cut deeper than any insult from his parents. Easier for him. Easier to let them break me than to risk standing beside me. That night I didn't cry. I stared into the mirror, my face pale, my eyes hollow. And I didn't recognize myself anymore. The woman begging at the dinner table, the woman scrubbing floors until her skin split, the woman pleading with her husband for scraps of protection, that wasn't me. That was the version they had created, the version they wanted to see. And in that mirror, something inside me hardened. I realized they didn't hate me because of what I did. They hated me because they could. Because I allowed them to. Because I bent instead of breaking them. The next morning, when my mother-in-law snapped, "You missed a spot," I didn't answer. I cleaned it in silence, my face blank. When my father-in-law muttered, "She's worthless," I didn't flinch. And when my brother-in-law laughed, "She's pathetic," I didn't look up. I gave them nothing. No tears. No begging. No reaction. And for the first time I saw something flicker in their eyes, confusion. They expected me to crumble. They wanted the entertainment of my suffering. But I had stopped giving it to them. That night, lying in bed beside my silent husband, I realized they had underestimated me. They thought my begging was weakness. But it had been patience. And patience, once it runs out, becomes something far more dangerous. The glass had finally spilled over. And I was done being their servant, their joke, their shadow. Now it was my turn to make them beg. The day it finally turned came like any other. The sun rose, the house buzzed with their voices, and I moved through the rooms like a shadow. But inside me there was no trembling, no begging left. Only silence and something colder. That evening I cooked dinner again. Not because I hoped for approval, but because I wanted to watch. I set the table as I always did, placed the food in front of them, and sat at the far end without a word. My mother-in-law lifted her fork with a smirk. "Let's see how she ruins it this time." My father-in-law snorted. My brother-in-law chuckled. And my husband, as always, he lowered his eyes. They took their first bites. My mother-in-law opened her mouth, ready to spit venom, but I spoke before she could. My voice was calm, sharper than their knives. You don't need to pretend anymore. I know you hate me. The room went silent. Forks clattered against plates. Their eyes snapped toward me, wide with shock. No tears rolled down my cheeks this time. My face was steady, my voice even. I've cooked. I've cleaned. I've begged. And you've laughed. Every insult, every smirk, every time you looked at me like I was dirt, you thought it made you powerful. But really it just made you small. My mother-in-law's face flushed red. How dare you? She began, but I didn't let her finish. No, I said firmly. How dare you? You turned your home into a stage to humiliate me. And you? I looked at my father-in-law. You cheered her on like cruelty was strength. His jaw tightened. I turned to my brother-in-law. And you treated me like entertainment. Mocking me when I broke, laughing at me when I bent. His smirk vanished. Then I turned to the one person whose silence had hurt the most. My husband. He sat frozen, his face pale. And you, I said softly, but my words cut sharper than any scream. You promised to stand beside me. You promised to protect me. But when they tore me apart, you hid. You let me beg alone. My voice cracked. Not with weakness but with finality. Do you know what silence does? It kills louder than words. The table was quiet. For the first time their laughter was gone. My mother-in-law shifted uncomfortably. My father-in-law muttered something under his breath, but he didn't meet my eyes. My brother-in-law dropped his gaze. And my husband, he looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. But it was too late. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. I don't need any of you, I said. Not your approval. Not your silence. Not your cruelty. I won't beg again. Not ever. They stared at me as I walked away, carrying nothing but my notebook and my pride. My mother-in-law tried to spit one last insult, but her voice faltered. The room had shifted. The power they fed on my begging, my tears, was gone. They were left with only themselves, their laughter dying in their throats. That night I packed my things. My husband stood in the doorway, eyes wet, whispering, "Please don't go." I looked at him, the man who had sat through my humiliation, and I saw clearly. He didn't beg for me, not once when it mattered. Now his pleas were too late. I begged enough for both of us. I whispered back and I left. The air outside was cold, but it was clean. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of their laughter pressing on my chest. I walked down the street with my bag on my shoulder, each step lighter than the last. Behind me the house stood still, filled with people who had thrived on my pain. Now they had nothing left to feed on. Days later I heard whispers through neighbors and friends. The laughter at that dinner table had stopped. My mother-in-law grew bitter, my father-in-law quiet, my brother-in-law restless. And my husband, he sat in silence, the same silence he once used against me, but this time it was his own prison. As for me, I didn't return. I built a life where I wasn't a servant, a joke, or a shadow. I carried the scars of their cruelty, but I also carried the strength they never saw. They thought they hated me, but the truth was simpler. They feared me. Because I walked away and they could not. And sometimes, in the quiet of my new home, I think back to that table, to their mocking laughter, to his silence. And I smile, not with bitterness but with power. Because in the end I was the one who stopped begging. And they were the ones left empty.